Ann Perret is back here in the KRQE News 13 digital studio once again to discuss her new investigation. This is looking into some issues, it sounds like, two separate events, both involving what you call here in the story violent acts with Santa Fe City employees. Ann, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
And this is one of these stories that is unique because, yeah, when you put it together that there are two different violent incidents that have happened all with Santa Fe City employees, it really does make you wonder what's going on there. But just to give people an idea of what this story is about, can you sort of give us a brief rundown? How did you get started on this, and really what was your goal here in this story?
Of course. So from September of 2021 through March of 2022, this year, there were two separate violent incidents. They both happened between Santa Fe's city workers. So in September, it was a fist fight in the employee parking lot. One employee was actually still on the clock, and then the supervisor had clocked off. But it was the supervisor who actually knocked out the employee, and you can see it on video of that employee, I mean, completely falling to the ground. That happened in September. And then in March of this year, as we were looking into that September incident, we found out that there was a shooting between two City of Santa Fe employees. And this was actually on their way home from work on a Monday. Wow. They one started tailgating the other, then there was another fist fight in the middle. Somebody in the middle of the road, somebody pulls out a gun and shoots and kills the other city employee. Wow. So we talked to the union who represents three of those employees, of course not the supervisor, the three others, and then talked to the city as well to just find out what's going on. Is this a coincidence, or is this some sort of workplace violence situation that needs to be handled and addressed? Yeah,
so when you're looking into one and another situation happens, why was it that, I guess just to start with, you wanted to take on this challenge of looking into these incidents? Because I think there are some people that might say, fights happen between coworkers. Mm-hmm. That's a natural part of American life. But what was it that stood out to you?
So we actually received an email from our anonymous source who was concerned about what he was seeing, what city employees were dealing with. He tells us that this fight happened. We hadn't heard about this. He tells us it's on video. So we, of course, filed a public records request to get that video. And as soon as we saw it and saw what happened, then we find out there were criminal charges filed. Of course, as we've seen in several different cases, that case was dismissed because the officer didn't show up. The officer actually got a new job. But it was interesting, by the time we heard about it, it was several months later that this had never been addressed. And at that point, there was no discipline either for either person involved, the supervisor or the employee. And then we spoke with the union to find out their thoughts on this, and the union said, yeah, we've been trying to get this addressed for some time. We also filed a public records request for this video and any other reports pertaining to it, what's been going on with the city. They meet with HR once a month. They had been asking about it. Why is nothing happening here? And as you hear in the story, the union president even says, because nothing happened to this supervisor, can I just go punch an employee? Mm-hmm. In the city parking lot. I mean, they were on city property when it happened. It was middle of the workday. It was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's kind of what sparked it. And then as we went to interview the union, it happened to be the day prior that shooting had happened in the middle of St. Michael's Road in Santa Fe between the other two city employees. That was in March. So just kind of, again, that question of, is this a coincidence, or, is something going on here? And of course the union says, something's going on here. The city hasn't been addressing this. Something needs to happen here.
Yeah, and along those lines, that union president, Gilbert Baca, he says in your story, akin to, we filed a lot of complaints, never got an answer from HR on any of them, sort of what he says in the story. And I wanted to ask you, was he able to elaborate a little bit more on just maybe how many of these complaints are out there? I know a lot of times people we'll sort of generalize and say, we filed a lot of complaints, but maybe the specific sometimes is not there. But I wanted to ask you, was he able to give you maybe a little bit more specificity about just the volume of these levels of complaints about situations happening amongst Santa Fe City employees?
Yes, so the union president says that he represents about 400 city employees. So you can imagine, I'm sure he's getting emails, phone calls about a number of incidents every week. We did not get into that specific number. He didn't quantify that for us. But specific to these incidents, with the September incident, he did say that they had spoken up about this supervisor, who again was the one who threw that knockout punch, knocking out the other city employee. He said they had complained about this guy before and really nothing had been done. And then with the March incident, he gave both union members, of course, they're both union members, so they can't file any grievances against each other. That's not how it works. But he did give each of them guidance, instructions on how to report to their own supervisor what was going on to get the problem addressed. And to him, the big thing was, let's move people around so that they don't have to interact with each other. Because of course, not everybody's going to get along at work, especially with 400 employees. Those are union members. And then you've got, other employees who are higher up. Not everybody's going to get along. That's just how life is. But this can be addressed. Changes can be made to try to ease the situation for them.
I see. Well, I wanted to talk about both of the fights that you cover here in this story as well. And this is starting with the video now you're seeing in the center of your screen is this one that you had mentioned happened in September 2021. Two city employees, you mentioned this fist fight, environmental services supervisor Leroy Griego and a Parks and Rec employee named George Miller. Criminal case is ultimately dismissed, as you mentioned in the story, but the fight between both of them seemingly happened over, I guess you could say, allegations between family members and other people who weren't directly involved in that fight on the street there. But to ask you, has anything happened since your interview related to maybe the processes the city has taken, or has maybe something happened with the criminal case? What's happened since you started looking into this, if anything?
Well, the union's big gripe was that no discipline had been doled out. Nothing had happened. This hadn't been addressed. Again, they meet with HR once a month. They had asked, why is nothing happening? And we interviewed, I spoke to the city manager on April 7th it was, and I just received a memo this week that was sent to George Miller, again, the Parks and Recs employee, from his supervisors. It was a memo, a notice of contemplated action, saying that they had just reviewed the police report. Again, that's 7 months later since this incident had happened. And while reviewing it, they believe that he initiated it because he pushed the supervisor first. And so as a result, this is a violation of two different workplace policies. They need to have a meeting. He is at risk of a 10-day suspension. Also likely going to have to take a mandatory anger management class. And but that meeting was supposed to happen last week. It was canceled for scheduling issues, and I'm told it's expected to happen the first week of May. But the timing is just interesting, right? I mean, why are they just now hearing about this, or just now reviewing this police report on April 1st, and then just now taking this notice of contemplated action? Again, we do know that case, that criminal case, was thrown out. Both Griego, the supervisor, and Miller, the employee, were both charged with public affray. Yeah. It's a misdemeanor. The case was thrown out just because the police officer didn't show up. But, a lot of other employees, a lot of other workplaces, as soon as somebody is criminally charged, there's action being taken. And that case wasn't thrown out for several other months. So that was a big question from the union, too. Did you know about this? I mean, what's going on here? Yeah. So, the timing is interesting.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, you mentioned this week, we're talking about this on April 27th here. And so, just to give people an idea, this again happened back in September.
Yep.
2021. So it's been quite some time, and it goes to show you, I mean, we don't necessarily have the evidence to suggest that it was directly because you started asking questions, but the timing certainly suggests that something may be there. So interesting in that case. I know there's the second case that you've talked about here. This is the shooting that happened after work at St. Michael's and Cerrillos, if I'm correct. And this involved the death of an employee. We were seeing some of the video here that was presented in court related to this case of the situation occurring. This being Carl Rougemont now, who is charged with shooting and killing his coworker Christopher V. Hill. I wanted to just ask you, where are we at with the status of that case? Because we know, since it does involve a homicide, there is a court proceeding, a criminal case that is happening. Oftentimes, homicides obviously are taken far more seriously than sometimes something like public affray, for example. But what's the status of this case? So
there was a pretrial detention hearing back in March, towards the end of March, about a few weeks after this incident happened, and the video was actually entered in as evidence then, a very public murder. I mean, that was cell phone video. This is people whose cars were right next to this, watching this all unfold. They're videotaping it, and then, I mean, they speed off as soon as they see that gun and hear those gunshots. So pretrial detention hearing in March, that's where we get this evidence, and the judge ruled that Carl Rougemont could be on house arrest at his parents' home, which is in Pecos. So he's on a GPS tether there. He is out awaiting trial, again on house arrest, but out for now. He was not considered really a risk, if that makes sense. And
a risk in that you would be held in jail pending trial, essentially. The judge made that determination. That's
also where it was decided that instead of the charge of open murder, it would be a charge of second-degree murder. And as of right now, looking at the court record, it doesn't appear that trial will happen until probably the new year. Several months down the road, but as of right now, I believe it was the last week of December when the jury trial selection was scheduled for.
So that case still needs, has quite a few more, I guess, legal happenings before anything may be decided.
Yes. And on that, if you don't mind, what I thought was interesting is Rougemont's defense attorney is considering this self-defense. If you see in the video, it does appear that V. Hill is on top of Rougemont. We don't know what started this. You know, again, this is cell phone video. We don't know when they clicked record, but in what you can see in the video, V. Hill is on top throwing punches, and then you see Rougemont pull a gun out of his waistband, and they kind of flip as he shoots V. Hill. And now V. Hill is on the ground, and then Rougemont, as you're seeing here, walks away, walks back to his car. So, it's a really sad case, and you could audibly hear people crying during that hearing as well.
It's certainly just remarkable, and it stands out as one of those situations you just don't see happen very often, and certainly has gotten a lot of attention because of that.
Yes.
Speaking to the broader issue here, right? You interviewed John Blair, the city manager for the city of Santa Fe, and really asking that question, though, at least in this second case, right, between Rougemont and V. Hill. There were no known issues in their files between the two. That's reported in your story. I know we don't report on hearsay because it is just that. It's hearsay and rumor. Were you able to find out anything more from perhaps the union boss who maybe elaborated a little bit more, or maybe family elaborated more about perhaps the relationship between these two guys that perhaps John Blair was not able to give you information on?
Yes, so City Manager John Blair says he looked through both of their personnel records. There was nothing in there that these two had an issue, so how could they have known that anything was going on? And he repeatedly made it clear to me that the police called this a road rage incident. That's what they were going off of this as. And he says this just happened to be a road rage incident between two people who live in Santa Fe who happen to work for the city. So he doesn't believe that this is connected at all to work. Okay. What's interesting is the two were driving home from work that Monday. They did work in the exact same department, and Gilbert Baca, the union president, says it was well known. It was understood amongst everyone who worked in that department. These two did not get along. And I asked, why isn't there anything in the file? And kind of as I mentioned earlier, he says these are both union members. You cannot pin two union members against each other. So we're not going to file grievances like that. But I can give them both guidance to say, hey, go talk to your supervisor here. You go talk to your supervisor. Let's see what can be done. And Baca was really, really pushing for at least one of them to be transferred out of that department. Because again, as I said, not everybody's going to get along. So, but we'd like to continue to do our job. So let's just kind of move people around and see if we can address it in this way. In court, though, we learned that in that personnel file, one of Rougemont's supervisors reported feeling physically threatened by him. That was about a year prior. She did file a formal grievance regarding that, but we don't know what happened as a result of that. The state police officer also in court testified that he heard from their coworkers from speaking with them that the two did not get along. So kind of some confirmation there. Yeah. So again, of course, you can go by there's no documentation here, but then those are all the reasons, right, why there wasn't any documentation. So
people willing to say that on the record as well. I think what we run into a lot of times is that we hear about things. When I was talking about we don't report on hearsay, there's a lot of people that aren't willing to come out and say something officially. They just because they don't want that attributed to them. But these are people who are saying these things on the record. I think it's important to note there. I mentioned elaborating a little bit more on the broader issue. You spoke to John Blair, of course, again, the Santa Fe city manager. You asked that question, is this, or essentially alluding to the idea of if whether or not this is a symptom, these two incidents, a symptom of unchecked sort of workplace aggression and culture in multiple Santa Fe departments. And so I understand you did get a longer answer from him about sort of his take on these two incidents, right?
Yes. Specific to September, we do know his response was that this had nothing to do with work. As you mentioned, there was kind of a personal issue between the family members of Miller and Griego, the two involved in that fist fight. But again, it happened on work property. The two did work together with March. Again, he said this is a road rage incident between two people who live in Santa Fe, who happen to work for the city of Santa Fe. But again, the union pointing to, they were leaving work, they worked together. Like this was something, again, that all of these people are saying there was an issue. So, but he very much said this is nothing to do with the workplace environment. And actually, I think we have a clip from him kind of further explaining that, this could have happened anywhere because of what's going on in our world right now.
Let's play that clip here, right here. This is, again, John Blair's extended answer when you'll hear the question leading into this.
Do you think that there's a problem at all amongst employees? Or is all of this separate from the workplace?
I think that everyone across the country right now is emotionally charged. They're afraid. 2+ years of COVID, frustrations with being isolated. Are we quarantining? Are we not? There's a war in the Ukraine. There's been a lot of chaos going on. And I think in the day-to-day, people all across the country are coming to their daily experience from a heightened sense of anxiety. And I don't think there's any relationship between the two incidents that we've seen here that involve City of Santa Fe employees. They're both unfortunate. They're both acts of violence that we don't want to see in our community. But I don't know that city employees are in any more of a heightened state of agita or agitation or anxiety than anyone else that are in our community.
So there you have it. That being the full answer there to John Blair kind of taking his look at these two incidents happening.
And on that, I said, okay, so, if this is your response, then what are you doing, right, to help employees? And he did mention they had these mental health and wellness events that they've been trying to do, making sure that people know that therapy is an option with their health care. They're trying to give raises to employees just to kind of see if that will help solve what he believes is the problem, which again is that kind of anxiety, tension around everything that's been going on in our world over these last 2 years.
Yeah, well, Ann, this is a really interesting story. Appreciate you reporting it. Is there a way that people can contact you if they have a question, comment, or anything that they want to pass along your way?
You can always email me at ann.perrette@krqe.com or find me on Twitter or Facebook. It is just the name Ann Perrette.
Okay. Ann, thanks again. We appreciate you being here in the digital studio here today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity.